We don't need it to be made in Canada. We'll have the jobs. That's why Canada should be our 51st state. We'll bring back industries, and we'll bring back our jobs, and we'll make America industry great again. So essentially, we're putting on a 25% tariff without exception on all aluminum and all steel. We'll be talking about other subjects like cars. We'll be talking about drugs and pharmaceuticals. We'll be discussing chips.
Here we go again. U.S. President Donald Trump is getting ready to slap tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports into his country, including from Canada. Now, we've been here before. The difference from 2018, though, is that it'll be 25% tariffs on both steel and aluminum. Last time, aluminum was only hit with a 10% tax. Trump is considering an exemption for Australia, but not Canada. It's all expected to take effect March 12th. Here's Canada's response so far.
Tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum would be entirely unjustified. We are the U.S.'s closest ally. Our economies are integrated. Canadian steel and aluminum is used in a number of key American industries, whether it's defense, shipbuilding, manufacturing, energy, automotive.
We aren't banging down the door to the U.S. and saying, take more aluminum. They need it. And it's no different than steel. What I'm concerned about is Canada and American interests. They're good. It's China that wants to ship in cheap steel, cheap aluminum, and undermine American and Canadian jobs.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford there in Washington, D.C. He is part of all of the Team Canada effort from the premiers. They are all descending on the U.S. Capitol, trying to tell Canada's message to U.S. lawmakers and help earn some sort of an exemption from these kinds of tariffs. Andrew Furey is part of that team. He's the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, and he joins me right now. And welcome back to Power Play, Premier. Thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to. How are you today?
Great, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you, how are those meetings going in Washington, and how critical are they these next couple of days where we see all of the premiers down there talking to key members of either the Trump administration or other people in government?
I think they're incredibly important. I think they're important not only to try to penetrate the sphere of influence of the president and the key decision maker being himself, but it's also important to reinforce both the macro and microeconomic impacts of these tariffs. I can tell you, anyone we've talked to, there does not appear to be any broad support for these tariffs, either as an economic measure, a political measure, or a fiscal measure. There's usually universal recognition that we have an integrated economy that works well on both sides of the border, which I think is one of the reasons you're not seeing many Republicans at this point raise their hand or their voice to comment on it, because there's a broader understanding that of the impacts that this will have at the macroeconomic level, but more importantly, and the story that we're telling, is at the micro level, the specific impacts that this will have on individual families across the United States. We know that the president will respond to market trends, rise or fall in the markets. He'll also respond to rise or fall in polls. So if these tariffs, hopefully they don't have them, but if they do go in place, individual families will feel the impact, and whether that's on their grocery bill, their electricity bill, or their gas bill. And that's going to be a voice that the president undoubtedly is going to hear.
How frustrated are you, though, that we're not hearing from Republicans speak up just yet, even though Canada has announced a number of targeted measures that we could put in place if those tariffs do return? We know that Canada has a bit of a reprieve until the beginning of March. But is it difficult to go there and have those conversations and tell them that you need their voices to be raised, yet they still don't say anything to the president?
Well, don't take my comments before to say that they're not exercising their voice. They're not exercising it publicly. I do believe that the sphere of influence around the president is hearing the impacts that the tariffs will have at a CEO level, at a state level. I mean, when you think about the integration of Saskatchewan's agriculture or Newfoundland and Labrador's electricity or oil and gas, it's deeply integrated. And so I think they're hearing it, they're feeling it and hearing it from their constituents, and I do believe they're exercising their voice towards the decision makers, but that is not translating onto Fox News, for example. It is, but I do think one of the other conversations that we're having here that is incredibly important is how offensive and hurtful and confusing to Canadians the comment about the 51st state is. And even though people dismiss it as a joke, the President of the United States had an opportunity in the Super Bowl interview to refute that statement or to lighten it. And in fact, he doubled down on it, saying he's not joking. He does believe that Canada should be the 51st state. That is incredibly offensive and insulting. And that is a message that I've delivered to anybody that I've spoken to. I'm not afraid to say it. As Canadians, we shouldn't be afraid to say it. They need to know that that is not okay. It's not okay in any vein, humor or otherwise, to threaten our sovereignty, our identity, or our values.
And how's that being received by the people you're saying it to? Or do they understand the impact of it?
They still are dismissing it to a certain extent. Well, it's never going to happen. But if you look at the history of Trump, that's his modus operandi. He starts with something as outrageous and outlandish, and all of a sudden it becomes a policy, and then it becomes a reality. So the time to nip this in the bud is now. It is a threat to Canada. We need to treat it as such. The message that I'm also relaying to decision makers here, political and otherwise, it has galvanized a Canadian pride and Canadian unity and Canadian identity like nothing I've ever seen in my life. So while the president may have thought he had a fractured nation that he could extract value from, the exact opposite is true. We have a strong, united, sovereign, independent country who will be diplomatic and will be friendly, but will be responsive to any threat that he comes forward with, economic or otherwise.
I wanted to ask you about some specific meetings that premiers are supposed to be having over the next little while, specifically with Republican North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer. He chairs the Airland Subcommittee, which oversees the U.S. Army and Air Force. What do you hope to get out of that conversation? Specifically, we know that a lot of our steel and aluminum and a lot of the supply chains that Canada has with the United States is deeply intertwined with what they do for defense contracts. Do we think that that would be one of those key people, because he does have the ear of President Trump? Do you think that is one of those people that we can sort of turn and tell the Canadian story to, so that that can finally be relayed inside the Oval Office?
Absolutely. He's an incredible influencer of the president. He'll have an understanding of the integrated economy as it pertains to the military-industrial complex that he's surrounded with, and have a specific interest as it pertains to him and his constituency and his state. So there's twofold. Two reasons to talk to him. One is that, and helping him understand the integration of aluminum in particular, steel, nickel, and how that is integrated into the military-industrial complex and supply chain of the military. But also to talk to him about Canada's increasing commitment to NATO and how we can recognize the established commitment, I would argue, meet it and exceed it for the benefit of all of North America. We need to move toward, despite the president's comments, we need to make sure we're keeping the diplomatic Canadian approach, the calm, cool, collective, responsive approach open. And as much as we are angered by the president's comments, we need to make sure that we are exercising a full diplomacy, especially when it comes to shared priorities, of which one of which I would argue is the military protection of Canadians and all of North Americans. And as Canadians, as leaders, we need to make sure we're investing in our own Canadian military complex, whether that's in boots on the ground and supporting our troops, or growing our bases, or growing our supply chain within Canada. We should be able to use that as a shared priority, which is economically beneficial to the United States and Canada alike. But that is a smart economic investment. It's a smart political investment. It's a smart defense investment for the people of Canada. And that's the message that I would like to relay to him.
Just before I let you go, you talked about that sort of diplomatic approach. How much of this is also going to leave them, or how much do you want to leave them with the notion that if you do follow through on these tariffs, that we will be hitting back just as hard and it will hurt? Is that something that you want to leave them with as well on this trip?
100%. We need to leave them with the impression, because not the impression, the reality that we are not capitulating. The president has what appears to be an imperialistic agenda, and appeasement is not going to work. We need to make sure that they know that while we may be friendly skaters, we will have our elbows up in the corners. And they need to know that there will be a responsible, prudent response if they threaten with economic tariffs or any other action. Canadians are nice and friendly and want to remain open to working together, but there is a point at which we will respond, as we have in the past and will in the future, not just to protect the acute threat of the economy and the fiscal reality of any of the downstream impacts of his decisions, but fundamentally to protect who we are as Canadians, the sovereignty and independence that was fought for, protected by our forefathers and foremothers to achieve who we are today. That cannot be threatened in any way, shape, or form. And that is one of the strong messages I'm delivering. Sometimes it's met with a bit of a take back, but you can't have the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, claiming on the Super Bowl interview that he wants Canada as the 51st state. And then when one of his senior advisors is questioned about a plan to invade Canada, and the answer is not definitively, categorically, without hesitation, no, I don't think so, was the response. None of that is okay. And we need to make sure that we're leaning into that message. While we want to be diplomatic to solve the economic and fiscal issues that are currently on the table, independence and sovereignty is not on the table and never will be.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Andrew Furey, thanks so much for joining us.
Great, thanks very much.